Well, I hope you're having a good day. I think I might just start by introducing myself. My name is Andrew Wright. I'm a communication and creative professional with over 35 years of experience in various industries. I work in the media, communication, consultancy, and learning sectors, running a number of businesses and creative teams, both in the UK, where I'm based, and internationally. I've worked as a broadcaster. I've also worked as a consultant, a voiceover artist, a producer, a sound recordist. I've had a very broad spectrum of experiences during my career. But these days, I run a number of companies and I consult and coach, and I'm delighted to be working with Country Navigator. Country Navigator is the platform for cultural intelligence and inclusion training, and we give individuals and teams and organizations the awareness, knowledge, and skills to leverage the benefits of culture and build truly inclusive global workplaces. Our digital assessments, tools, and learning pathways will help you navigate culture more effectively and more productively. And I'm delighted to see so many of you joining us today for a session which hopefully you will find of use and of interest today. And I'd like to start by directing you to our first question and actually get you thinking. I'd also like to direct you to the chat box, which is available for anyone who'd like to drop in a thought, an opinion, or a question as we go through our conversation today. And at the end of our conversation, there should be time to answer some questions directly to you via chat. Well, you bring the questions to me via chat, and I'll be happy to work on giving you an answer. But we can also leave that opportunity open throughout the conversation. My producer is going to drop a URL into the chat box right now, and I'd invite you to click on it. And we're going to go over to a mural whiteboard. Now, mural is great. It's a great way of us exchanging ideas and dropping our own opinions into this conversation. So we'll just wait for that URL to drop into the chat box. It's going to be there in just a second. And the question I'd like to ask is, why do we need innovation? What is it for? Why is creativity important? I'm going over now to the mural for that. I'd invite you to click on it. And if you've never used Mural before, this is a really, really easy tool where you can click, and you should be able to see my mouse in there. You can click on a shape, or actually a post-it note, and you can drag that onto the whiteboard, and you can make your own comment and we can share our ideas. It's a really nice way of expressing your thoughts. I've answered the question with a blue post-it note you'll see in the top right. And if the question is, why do you need innovation? What is it for? Why is creativity important? I've answered with the first phrase that came into my mind as a creative professional. We need creativity, I think, to react to a changing business environment. Creativity helps us to find solutions to those changes. So I see a large array of mice playing around in here now. If you click on a shape or you click on a text box, you can even click on an image, pick an image from the library, drag it onto the whiteboard, type in your particular answer. And I see one already here. So one of the answers is to find new ways of solving problems. Absolutely. If you think about some of the most complex problems in the world, and I'm a big manned spaceflight fan. So if you think about the challenge of putting a human being on the moon, I'm aware from reading a lot of the books about that history that many of the problems that they needed to solve to get a human being from the Earth to the moon and back again happened in quite unusual places. Some of the ideas came from really alternative sources, unconventional sources. And NASA, who were the institution running that project, continually challenged and put barriers up to some of these ideas. But they eventually got through. And some of the biggest innovations in the space race, like lining the lunar module with a layer of what was basically tin foil about that thin that you could stick a pencil through, that was adopted to save weight and ultimately save the program. It came from a really random source. Let's have a look at some more. To be able to predict and react to ever-changing situations. I like the idea of using creativity as a predictive tool. Creativity is the foundation of everything. Well, as a creative professional, I would have to agree. at some point, you may use a technique or an approach to start your business or develop it. But at some point, way back in the past, or even more recently, that idea was created by somebody, taking 2 or 3 ideas, putting them together in their brain, and coming out with a unique new process to challenge the current processes. You see, you'll move your mice out the way. There we go. To challenge the current processes, ultimately for I'm going to move this so I can read it. For improvement. Yeah, I mean, creativity is a great engine of improving a process or a business or a product or a conversation or an environment to survive. I think without creativity, well, mankind may well be in trouble. If we look at climate change, if we look at the developments that have taken place in renewable energy and what's happening not 30 miles away from where I live right now in a place called Cullum, where one of the teams developing sustainable nuclear fusion is working at the moment, incredibly creatively, to try and give us another renewable source of energy. And if the ideas and the creativity that go into fusion are as successful as we want them to be, we may solve all of our energy problems. Old solutions have failed. Yes, so we need new creativity to give clients the products they need. Absolutely. Product innovation is what keeps old companies like Nike and Adidas alive and thriving. Those companies are older now than the average company lasts for, and they survive because of innovation and creativity. Improving our daily life, to grow in the future, self-development. The world is changing, one Post-it note says, and we need innovation to adapt to the changing world. The ideas on this whiteboard are a creative response to a question. Conversation itself is a creative process. If you don't think you're creative, you're wrong. You are. Confidence in creativity is important. So while you continue to write notes on there and share those ideas, we share with you a story. Now, if we didn't use our creative and innovative faculties, we'd still be lying on our backs, waiting for our parents to change and feed us. I've got young children. I feel this very strongly. But in business terms, if you're not innovative, you end up being the blockbusters of the entertainment world. In 2004, the founders of Netflix, can you believe it's only 18 years old, which was a small tech startup, offered their IP and company to blockbusters for how much money do you think? They actually offered their IP and their business to blockbusters for $50 million. And blockbusters didn't see the evolution of streaming and they declined the offer to buy the business. Blockbusters folded not many years after that with around $900 million of debt. Today, Netflix is currently worth around $200 billion. And an example from an industry I used to work with, the record industry. In 1999, I think it was, the web streaming service Napster was developed by 3 guys out in the Western United States. And it was a way of getting music to you and I by streaming it digitally. This was revolutionary. This was groundbreaking. It was also illegal because it broke copyright laws. But even though Napster was closed down in 2001 and relaunched in a number of different guises over the years, it changed the way people saw in which they could consume music. When was the last time you bought a CD? I clung on for dear life, but even I'm now a regular Spotify user, a big music fan. The record industry ignored music streaming for a long time at its peril and lost a lot of the advantage in the way that music is distributed now. A new idea was rejected because of old thinking. A company that doesn't innovate dies, or it damages itself massively. People who don't innovate won't have the skills to thrive as the world evolves. Skills are needed. Thank you so much for the creativity that went into the whiteboard. And those whiteboards should stay available for you to have a look at through our session and perhaps beyond. So what are both innovation and creativity? My producer is now going to drop another mural link into the chat, and we're going to continue our expression and creativity in this conversation. So the question is, here's the new link. If you'd like to follow that link to our new mural, and now you've practiced the fun of using it, hopefully this will be even quicker. So in our new mural, here is my question. What are innovation and creativity? What do they mean? Again, I've kicked off the conversation by putting my answer in. In fact, that's an answer to another question. But I'm going to start off by saying, I think creativity is the process of building a new idea based on data or facts or old ideas. I always picture my brain taking 2 or 3 bits of information, stringing them together in a brand new way, brand new to me. I've worked in a creative industry for 30 odd years, and the old hands in that industry always used to say to me, remember, Andrew, there's no such thing as a new idea, just an old idea recycled. And whilst that's true much of the time, humanity is still capable of generating brand new ideas. I'm going to wait for a couple more of your answers to come in before I reflect them. But we remember the quote from the end of the Victorian era, perhaps in 1899, at the end of the 19th century, when there was a famous quote, and you can look up this quote if you want to find its source, but the quote said, everything that humanity needs has already been invented. This was at a time when electricity was in its infancy and the steam engine was well established. We weren't quite at aeroplane flight. We had hot air balloons, but the Industrial Revolution had changed the world. And there was a school of thought that said, we've done everything now. Humanity needs nothing more. But look at what the 20th century delivered. Look at the massive innovation and creativity that had not even been considered. Let's go to your whiteboard over here. You're talking about the answer to the question, what are innovation and creativity? Thinking outside the box is a favorite expression in creative meetings. And it often means break the mold of conventional ideas, introduce a radical idea into the conversation. Quite difficult to do for reasons which we'll discuss. Imagination. I heard a great piece of neuroscience recently that said that when you're dropping off to sleep, your consciousness, your brain detaches from reality and starts to drift through the subconscious. And when it does that, it's really open to new ideas, which is why falling asleep to instructional audiobooks apparently is quite effective at helping the ideas to go in. My kids do it every night. They know everything about every whale species imaginable because of a little audiobook we play them as they go to sleep. Creating with imagination. Christina, thank you. Create with imagination. And imagination is something we have as a child and is often suppressed as we get older, as people say, no, we don't need your ideas right now. Or I remember going to a school where I had a very grumpy teacher and she would often tell us just to shut up if we were talking too much. But some of the things that children were saying at the ages of 5, 6, 7, 8 were creativity. If we suppress creativity, we suppress imagination. Testing the limits of what is possible. Thank you. That's a lovely answer. Using intuition to develop new ideas. Time to think. How often do we build thinking time into our days? Days full of screens and meetings, back-to-back calls and interactions. A walk and a think, and a colleague of mine, a country navigator, sits under his tree in the summer and sits and writes and leaves space for ideas to ruminate and brew. Leaving space for ideas in one's day is very important. Applying new perspective to existing elements. Thoughts concerning a certain problem leading to a new idea is creativity. Yes, it is. Focus, people, difference, all great single word answers. Problem equals opportunity. Absolutely. Having a growth mindset means that you can look at a problem and say, we have an opportunity to create a solution here. And that word create or creativity comes up a lot. Innovation, the invention of an idea, the development of a thought into a solution. Thank you for sharing those. The whiteboard that you've just used is an excellent example of one of the fundamental building blocks of innovation, which is diversity. Here we have a diverse group of you. We are around 70 people in this room right now. We have diverse ideas, diverse perspectives, diverse thoughts. I'd like to share with you a few images. You'll notice we're not relying on slides today. We're trying to have a person-to-person conversation, but I am going to just briefly share with you a few pictures. And allow me just, producer, just to let you know, I'm unable to share my screen, which may not be too much of a problem, but perhaps you can come in and give me some guidance here. I can do this without the pictures. But if the producer can allow me to share my screen, let's see what we can do. He's probably just now rummaging around. Here we go. Thank you so much. Problem solved. So I'm just going to share, excuse me, this screen here. Thank you for your patience. I used to work in the TV industry, and in that industry, there were always 5 people to help you do everything. It was the most overstaffed environment in which I've ever worked. But now, as we present these modern day mini TV shows, now I understand why. So here we go. Let me see. Let me just get a nod from the producer. Do you see my slide about similar age and gender? Let me just check that that is now on screen with a number of colored dots in the bottom corner. Okay, I'm going to assume that you can see that picture, and I'm going to tell you what we're looking at here. In a team made up of people who have, oh, you see the whiteboard. Well, this is one of those moments where we can appreciate the tech fails happen in even the best planned scenario. Hopefully now you can see the dots. Okay, so perfect, thank you. All right, thank you guys. So in a team made up of people who have similar backgrounds, similar education, similar experiences, each team member's view of the universe of knowledge overlaps. So the collective perspective covers only a small proportion of the world, because those people often come from the same part of the world, even in organizations I've worked in, the same schools or the same universities. If you only hire people who only speak English, you can't interact easily with customers who speak other languages. Now, this next picture takes that story on. If you have a cognitively diverse team with a wide spectrum of experiences, suddenly you collectively have access to a much wider pool of information from the universe of knowledge. There is less overlap. So each team member adds something unique, but that's not the end of the story. The magic ingredient is inclusion. The magic ingredient does this. When you have the right context and culture, not only does everyone contribute, but the team can make the connections between each perspective to draw excellent, creative, and innovative solutions that fix real-world problems. Inclusivity and diversity. And hopefully the picture illustrates the point I'm trying to make. Now let's talk a little about culture and innovation. And I'd like to introduce you to a tool that we have, a country navigator called WorldPrism. Now, WorldPrism is a really interesting tool to find out where our behavior sits within our culture. And I've done a WorldPrism analysis. Most of our team have. Some of you may have done the same thing. It's a great way of illustrating how culture can change the way we behave or view the world. So I'm going to show you one of those WorldPrism tools right now. And this is a sliding scale of how we either take risks or we avoid risks. Let's find out where you are on the scale. So without any other information, are you somebody who takes risks? If you're a risk taker, I'd like to share in the chat box a number. Risk takers, you are number 1. People who are total risk avoiders, you are number 10. And all the numbers in between tell us where you are on that scale. So, for instance, I would say that I used to be about a number 9 because I grew up with a father who was very careful about money and careers and jobs and cars. We'd spend an hour planning a route on a roadmap before we went anywhere. And I've become more of a risk taker as I've realized it frees you. So let's see what you guys are coming. Oh, the numbers are coming in thick or fast. This must be how it is on Eurovision. We have 6s, 5. Scott, you're an 8, so you're a little bit more risk averse. Anna, you're down there down in the bottom end, so your risk taking is higher on the scale. Christina, you're right in the middle. I wonder whether you might say, well, it depends on the situation. Ivana, you're number 8. The highest numbers we've got are 8. The lowest numbers we've got so far are 2. Matthew McLaughlin from Country Navigator is a 3 at work. and I've seen his risk-taking in action, but at home, quite rightly, he's a number 8. And that just shows you, joking aside, how situational this behavior can be as well. Perhaps because the culture at work is rather different from the culture at home. Thanks, Matthew, for that. I love the 2 answers. So we're somewhere between a 2 and an 8 in our room. And a few of you might be thinking, yeah, well, I look at that differently depending on the situation I'm in. Alice, you think you're a 3, though it used to be nearer an 8. Alice, if you can, in one sentence, perhaps you could tell us why you think that change has taken place. While you're doing that, let me explain. It's really easy to see that if everyone in your team is a 1 on that scale, very much into risk taking, then although the team will come up with incredibly radical ideas, none of them will work because no one's thinking through the consequences. If everyone's a 10, risk avoiding, then you will, in about 20 years, come up with a really good answer. But there'll be so many mitigations and insurances and fail safes that the solution will be unworkable and possibly too late. Thanks, Alice. Actually, NASA says, is it the older we get, the less risk taker we become because we're wiser, or the more risk taker we get because we've been through a lot? I think that depends on the individual. I would say that with my home, as Matthew shared, I have become more careful because I have 3 young children and a mortgage and all those things which are not very happy to have lots of risk thrown at them. But actually, I also don't want my children to be wrapped in cotton wool. So we're trying to take increasingly riskier holidays and go to places which are more remote or further afield or culturally different from the life they're used to here in Oxfordshire. So my risk-taking scale is quite situational. And Alice says she left a steady job to be an entrepreneur. Congratulations. And you discovered risks do pay off. Yeah. Even writing an email to someone introducing yourself and saying, I'd love to talk about working together. That's a risk for many, many people who live in a very safe working environment. And that risk can pay off if what you've got to back it up is of value to the person you're talking to. Little risks. Risks are normally quite small day-to-day ones. Occasionally we'll take the big leap like Alice has described. Thanks, Alice, for sharing that. So if you're a risk taker, don't dismiss the risk avoiders. Seek out their advice and value their counter positions. It gives you a diversity of opinions. If you're a risk avoider, use the input from risk takers to look for the unusual or even overlooked potential solutions and borrow their energy to maintain momentum as you look for innovative solutions. If you've got any other suggestions, please do share them in the chat. It's so nice to see the conversation starting. Thanks to Alice and NASA and Matthew. So the next scale I'd like to show you is the shared and concentrated scale. For those with a shared orientation, ideas can come from anyone in the team. Each person's input has equal weight. It's very egalitarian. And proposing a new idea doesn't threaten the more senior members, assuming they too are shared oriented. The risk is that because everyone's voice has similar weight, the group becomes decision averse. No one takes responsibility. And that's where the concentrated orientation adds value. They're comfortable putting the responsibility for a final decision on one person. That person is a facilitator who listens to the various inputs and then narrows them down, narrows down the discussion to a solution that they can be accountable for. There's an example of this I heard recently, and I wonder if you see the relevance in the same way I do. This is a picture. Can anyone identify this picture? People over a certain age will remember this picture from the news in the 80s. If you're under a certain age, this picture will be slightly more challenging. I'll play the spot the person game very quickly in chat. First person, yes, David, of course. It's a young Nelson Mandela, and it's Nelson Mandela wearing more tribally oriented clothes rather than his modern, more Western suits when he was president. Actually, he had a great line in shirts as president. I always loved that. Now, in South Africa, and if there's any South Africans in our conversation and you want to correct my detail, please do. But I'm aware from my South African friends, and my wife's family has some South African heritage, that there are maybe 13 or more tribal cultures within South African society. And Nelson Mandela's father was actually a senior member of his tribe, if not a tribal leader. The story that's relevant here is that Mandela would go to the tribal meetings with his father. And he talked about this in later life. And he said he noticed something really interesting. In many of the meetings he'd been to with the ANC or even in government, he'd watch people walk into a room and say, well, look, here's my idea. What do you think? And of course, what would happen is that the conversation would often focus around that one idea and not be particularly diverse. What Nelson Mandela's father would do, he would introduce the challenge or the subject and say, I'd like to know what you all think. And then he would sit and listen. And apart from curating the conversation, he would say nothing else. And he would listen and listen and listen. And as he got to the end, I'm just going to unshare my screen. As he got to the end of that conversation, he would decide what his outcome would be. He would start to create his own solution to that problem based on everything he'd heard. So in terms of shared and concentrated, he would start out the meeting with a very shared approach, but as the meeting moved towards the end, his conclusion would be concentrated. He would take responsibility for making the final decision. And I found that story fascinating. And a man came to my house about 6 months ago to fit shutters, blinds to the inside of a window. We moved house about 1.5 years ago. And he was South African. And I was asking him how long he'd been in the UK. And we were talking about politics. Yeah, Minette, my facts may be off there. It may be more than 13. In my head, I keep thinking 18, but we can fact check it. You're quite right to challenge me on those different cultures. This man was sitting in the room and we were talking about South African politics and he gave his commentary. And then I said, well, what do you think of Mandela? He's someone I've always been very interested in. He goes, I met Mandela. In fact, I had lunch with him while he was president. And I said, so what was he like? And he goes, good question. It was the most amazing lunch I've ever had because despite being president, he spent the whole conversation just listening to me and asking me really broad questions and focusing on the details of my answer. And his whole strategy was to listen. And he'd met other people who'd met him. And he said, that's what he does with everybody. He wants to hear other people's views. So when he makes his concentrated final decision, he's done it by allowing a shared approach towards the expression of ideas, facilitating various inputs and then narrowing down the discussion to a solution that they can be accountable for. That is common with South African chiefs. Thank you so much for that input. They solicit input of others and then decide. And we can see here how different cultures can really influence the way we encourage the creativity of ideas and the sharing of creativity and turn those into decisions. Thank you for sharing that. Understanding where each person in your team is on the scale will help you measure their contribution and give you an additional tool to frame your own contributions. Now let's move on to talking about building an innovative culture. As a newborn baby, and I remember my babies, all happened in the last 8 years, we're unable to do anything. We're pretty useless when we're born. We know nothing. And apart from all those automatic functions that happen, all we can do is scream and leak. Now, innovation is the reason that we learn. We look to solve the problems around us. So the good news is all of us in the Masterclass have the ability to innovate and be creative. It is a human trait. We have the ability to learn and to experiment with new ideas, but in a collective work environment. We need a catalyst to be collaboratively innovative. And that catalyst is made up of unlearning, psychological safety, and listening. And we're going to talk about those as our masterclass continues. And now we're going to talk about this idea of unlearning, which some of you may be unfamiliar with. Again, please continue to contribute on the chat box. I'm really enjoying seeing your comments come up and I love reflecting what you're saying. So in chat, what do you think about unlearning? What is it? If you know what it is and you think it's important, why do you think unlearning is important? Please let me know what you think as I continue to share some ideas. So Let's use an example. Think of a sandwich, maybe a favorite childhood snack, or maybe you had one that you had today or planning to have later. I like sandwiches. Think of the bread and the fillings. Do you want mayo or butter or both? Maybe a little mustard, maybe a jam sandwich. My kids love those. Now imagine that your team is tasked with making the best sandwich. You're going to start that task with the image of your sandwich. The problem is that one team member likes Vegemite, another is gluten intolerant, another is vegan, another wants a honey sandwich, and yet another's thinking of something like a croque monsieur with toasted bread, melting cheese, and a bechamel sauce. I'm sorry, I'm actually making myself hungry describing that. Each person, though, will be trying to steer the others towards their perfect image of a sandwich. If you consciously unlearn what a sandwich is, then you start with a much clearer mind space. You can discuss the merits of wholemeal versus white bread or granary versus sourdough. You're not constrained by your conscious or unconscious biases. And you have to think why each element is important and how it adds value. You can look at radical combinations without dismissing them as odd. Each person's ideas are valuable and they add something new. Having unlearned the sandwich, creativity is put center stage and is allowed to play free. Let me just go to the chat because a lot of you are talking about this. Laura, unlearning involves departing from standard thinking patterns and makes room for new ideas. Absolutely. Diana, letting go of past lessons that may not be relevant for the current situation or time. I agree. Tanya, we've all learned to do things in a certain way and we do it almost automatically, which doesn't really allow for innovation. True. Habit. Habit is a dangerous thing in creativity. Changing the way we do things to do them better or more easily. Change is another barrier that many of us face. Elodie, unlearning equals reset the problem that you already thought was solved. I like that. Nonspecco, changing your thoughts or beliefs and learning to do things differently. I'm a fan of unlearning. I did that with the way I work and religion. But that's fascinating. And Barbara, let go to find new solutions. Your example is Picasso looking for ways to paint as a child. I had a brief example, and you may think this is a bit tenuous, but I remember someone told me the difference between Microsoft and Apple in their approach towards innovation. Microsoft, for many years, would find a new piece of technology, like a new chip or element of technology would be invented. Microsoft would say, right, what can we do with this? What product can we turn this into? Whereas Steve Jobs' approach was, I'd like to invent a screen about this big, and it's got loads of, I don't know, we'll call them apps on it. And I'm not quite sure how it works, but these are the things I wanted to do. And they had to go and build the technology to make his vision work. And that was a fundamental difference between those two companies, which is why Apple's designs were so groundbreaking. And a couple more on here. Deborah, if you do it the same way, we will always have the same result. That's an interesting approach, and that may well be true. As a challenge for you to reflect on, what do you need to unlearn? What are the things that you do or your team do that have always been done just because they work or because that's the way we do it? What can you unlearn as a team, as a business, as an individual in a business? Will that allow you to spark greater creativity? Let's think on that. I'd like now to talk about the second element that I mentioned earlier on, which is called psychological safety. Now, there is a huge risk to unlearning. Let's not ignore that. Unlearning moves from what has always worked to a completely unknown destination. Quite scary in a way. In a toxic culture, unlearning leaves a lot of room for blame and recriminations. Because when you don't have an instruction manual, you will make mistakes. Things will go wrong. It's unlikely you will get the perfect answer first time. Think of Edison with the light bulb. 10,000 attempts it took him to get the light bulb to work. I'd have given up far earlier than him. Let's tip our hat to Edison and the light bulb. In a blame culture, the first sign of a minor problem, people look to assign responsibility for the failure. This, by the way, happens in politics now in a way it didn't used to happen 30 or 40 years ago. Mistakes are less forgiven. Whispering campaigns start. More often than not, you go back to a system that you know doesn't work, but is familiar to everyone. This is too hard. Let's do it this way. We wouldn't have the light bulb if that had happened. Well, we wouldn't have had it as early. Risk-taking and failures are fundamental elements of innovation. Our ancestors didn't wake up one morning and discover the perfect wheel with spokes and tires that inflate. The biggest inhibitor to innovative ideas is fear. When Wayne Gretzky eventually retired from the NHL, the National Hockey League in the US, he had, I think, 61 all-time records. He was the leading goal scorer, the leading assist producer, and total point scorer in NHL history. It's a pretty decent career. He's attributed with this quote. Let me read this. You miss 100% of the shots you don't take. It's a really interesting quote. It's a real thinker. Success relies on an acceptance of trying something even when you don't know the outcome, taking that leap of faith. And that's what psychological safety is, a culture which doesn't blame you for trying and failing, which encourages new ideas. Imagine if Wayne Gretzky's coach had told him off for making 10 attempts at a goal and only scoring twice. He still scored twice. Let's forgive the 8 misses and focus on the 2 wins. Olivia, I've traveled a lot and lived in different countries and cultures. Unlearning is leaving your own beliefs behind and embracing the ones from your new country. The French say, in Rome, do as the Romans do. We say that in England too. I suspect we say that in a lot of places. That's a really interesting approach to unlearning. I've worked as an expatriate myself. Many of the people in the room have. And sometimes unlearning is actually quite helpful when we're trying to adapt and fit in and assimilate into a new culture. Okay, in the chat, can you suggest what you think psychological safety feels like? Let's take a risk. There's no wrong answers here. I'd like to see you take a risk on giving me whatever answer comes to mind. What do you think that psychological safety feels like, or what do you know it feels like? And there's one comment in here that says unlearning does not exist. What we do is to assimilate new ways of thinking. That is new learning. Well, here we have a diversity of ideas, exactly what we're thinking about. That's an idea I will go away and consider. If we shut down that disagreement, we're breaking the rules we're trying to set for ourselves here. So Victor says that psychological safety feels like no fear of making mistakes. Vanessa says no fear of what can happen. Yeah, the more answers will come up here. I'd like to see a more diverse range. So let's not redefine it, but how does it feel to be in a psychologically safe team? Psychological safety comes from the top, comes from leadership. The team leader has to be prepared to support the team, not just in making mistakes, but in the authenticity that each one brings. We've talked about the value of cognitive diversity. Without psychological safety, though, team members will feel the need to conform and go along with majority opinions. You don't have a team, you have a herd. People just follow. As a creative, I've been in rooms where people have just repeated ideas from the past, and that's easy and quick and saves money. But if you keep doing the same thing every year, you will miss the opportunity to change with the environment around you. And eventually you'll realize that what you're doing is incredibly outdated and outmoded. So many retailers in the UK have gone out of business because they've just repeated the same thing again and again and again. I have a friend who used to work for one of the major retail organizations in the UK, and it was very difficult to introduce, he told me, introduce online shopping. Some of you may be guessing which organization it is. I won't say. And they would not adapt to the demand for online shopping in their brand outlets. And those brands are now dead because by the time they realized they needed to, they were not set up to do it. They did not have the skill set. They spent 3 years trying and they ultimately failed. Let's just go back to the chat box here. Laura, it feels like you have a safety net for leaping to new solutions. That's interesting. Psychological safety makes it safer to take a risk because when that risk occasionally goes wrong, somebody is there to psychologically catch you and say, okay, we tried, didn't work, let's work out why and try again, rather than the finger pointing and blame culture that can exist. Alice, confidence that your opinion will be accepted as an opinion worth considering, not judged with bias. Elodie says, assess that the risk of failure is being worth it. The ability to suggest contemplation of new ideas without risk, says Mike. Of course, the risk is there. I suspect you're talking about the risk of blame, the risk of recrimination, the risk of finger pointing and feeling unsafe. Nontebeka says, I think it feels like the old adage, there are no stupid questions, where one feels like their ideas will not be considered stupid, but are acknowledged in case someone else can build upon it. Yeah, I agree with that. I always say in rooms I'm working in, there are no stupid questions. I don't like the word stupid. It's not a helpful word. Anna says space to offer ideas, but also challenge others. And the unpronounceable handle here, OJZCVBN, I had a go. Psychological safety is a natural condition in humans, but diverse by cultures. Some cultures are more emotional, where risk-taking and change is more frequent. Others are more rational and take changes in a controlled manner. I find that in creative conversations, as a team leader, building a culture of psychological safety is crucial. Otherwise, you will miss the less confident voice in the team. Let's go back to the whiteboard. Let's drop that next link, please. And I'll invite you to just pop back onto Mural. And we're going to ask the question, what do you need from your leader and from your colleagues to feel psychologically safe? Let's be specific. Let's apply this and reflect on your own situation. What do you need right now from the people around you or your leader to change your environment, if it needs changing, to become more psychologically safe? Now, as you do that, I'm going to get ready to share a video with you. So if you allow me just to fiddle with some buttons here, we're going to have a look at what's called the CARE model in a short video, which I'll share. And I've got to get my audio sharing sorted out. And then we'll just come back to this whiteboard in a moment, once you've populated it with ideas. I'm just going to press a couple of buttons, do some screen sharing, excuse me. Nice for you to have a short pause from my voice while I do this. Thank you for your patience. Okay. Excuse me. All right, sharing, I'm going to share this media player. I'm actually just going to make sure that I have shared my audio as well, which I hadn't. All right, so thank you for filling in this. Let's have a look at this short video about the CARE model. And if you can't hear the sound, let me know in the chat. Otherwise, I'll assume you can hear it. Here we go.
It can sometimes feel as if we've only just discovered the need for psychological safety, as if it's a uniquely 2020s phenomenon.
Thank you. I'm going to, I am not sharing the right screen. Yet another tech fail on my part. But luckily I'm in a safe room. So hopefully my failure will not be judged. Seems relevant. Okay, I'm sharing again now. That should be right. Let's continue.
But the phrase was probably first coined in the 1960s by organisational researchers, and it started to creep into management and leadership theory in the 1980s. Psychological safety became of interest to organisations in response to the boom and bust, aggressive management theories that had by and large overlooked the importance of the team. Psychological safety is a group culture which allows disagreement, experimentation and challenge without fear of rejection or becoming an outsider. It is characterised by inclusive behaviours and high levels of trust and respect. Timothy Clark wrote one of the best-known books about psychological safety and discussed 4 levels which can help you diagnose how you are doing. Inclusion. A person is actively included in or excluded from the team identity. The group accepts that there is a relationship with that person. Learner. The new person is given support in learning their place in the team, new processes, etc. They have permission to make mistakes and are expected to learn from them. Contributor. The person activates their learning and is expected to contribute fully in the team. And challenger. The person is accepted to the level that they are encouraged to challenge the status quo and propose new processes. However, creating psychological safety is complicated and can be hard work. To help, I recommend taking CARE. The CARE model is a great way to reinforce psychological safety in your team. Firstly, C for communication. Every interaction is a form of communication, and we need everything we do and think and say to reinforce psychological safety. Repeat the message and back it up with your actions. The second part of communication is transparency and honesty, and encouraging others to be similarly transparent. When the team sees that they can disagree and question decisions without judgment, they will begin to believe that they are protected and safe to do so themselves. Secondly, A, for authenticity. We must create a culture where everyone can be themselves and choose to share as much or as little of their personal life as they wish without fear. Authenticity allows for people to surprise and not to conform to expectations. It actively rejects stereotypes and generalizations. Thirdly, R for respect. Respect is more than acceptance and tolerance. It is an active verb that values difference of personal situation, personal and cultural values and practices and personal perspectives and opinions. It is respect in disagreement and respect for the unique value that each person brings. And finally, E for empathy. We cannot see things from another person's perspective completely, but empathy tries to. It is an attitude of inquiry that encourages us to recognize someone else's emotional and intellectual context and accepts that context as valid. But it doesn't stop there. It's not an abstract position. Empathy then asks us to treat someone in the way that they think is best for them, not the way you think is best for them. A word of warning though, psychological safety is fragile. If one person oversteps, it will shatter. It requires constant repetition and reinforcement to make it strong enough to withstand the stress and pressure of things going wrong. In a happy company with healthy profits and smooth projects, psychological safety is much easier to achieve. So if that describes you and your team, work on it now while it's simple. Otherwise, when you need it most, you'll find that you never really had it. Before you do anything else today, spend a couple of moments considering whether you and your team truly have psychological safety. Use Timothy Clark's model to see where you are and then start documenting how you can use the CARE model to take you to the next level.
Well, thank you very much for watching that. I think that was a fascinating insight, a more in-depth insight into the CARE model that we can use to build psychological safety. And in the creative industries I've worked in, the ones where I've been the most fulfilled, even just writing a script or a piece of creative copy, which is something I do a lot, when you know that that's going to be sent to someone who will receive it and approach their feedback using that CARE model and using a spirit of psychological safety, I'm prepared to take more risks in the work I do, knowing that if it's not quite right, the way that's treated will not be unkind in a very simple level. Thanks very much for filling in the mural whiteboard. The ideas on here that define what makes you feel psychologically safe. What suggestions can we use? Support from leader and colleagues. Support is an important word. Honest feedback, no fake interest. That's kind of a feedback note. No giving people the sandwich. Good news, bad news, good news. Make sure your feedback to people is specific and it talks about the impact or makes a suggestion for improvement. And make sure feedback is a conversation, not just a didactic approach. Confidence, help, trust is one of the most valuable currencies here. You must, as we heard in the video, you must be able to trust that safety will always be there from everybody, or it can be shattered. And trust takes a long time to rebuild. It's much quicker to destroy than it is to build. Thank you for contributing your ideas on here. With time against us, I'd like to just continue the conversation and talk finally about the idea of listening, something that you've all been kind enough to do in our session today. Let's well, the huge advantage of brainstorming, which is something that happens a lot in creative conversations, is that you pool various ideas together and you can sort them into one better idea. But if you're not listening, you're blocking out the ideas that improve your own thinking. Let's conduct a quick experiment. It's a really simple one. You'll need a piece of paper and a pen or pencil, or if you're saving the planet, something to digitally note something down on. It's going to give you I'm going to give you actually 60 seconds of total silence. And in that 60 seconds, I want you to write down as many ways as possible to cook chicken. Then in the chat, please write down how many ideas you came up with. Don't give me the ideas. Tell me how many. So your 60 seconds to identify as many ways that you can cook chicken starts now. And that's our minute up. I hope you enjoyed the gift of silence. The numbers have started coming in. Let's drop our next whiteboard link into the chat, please. And I'd like you to click on that link. In 60 seconds, brainstorm ways to reduce your carbon footprint. Again, you'll only have 60 seconds for this more complex issue. The most methods of cooking chicken we got were 10 or 11. But what I'd like to do now is ask you to go to the link in the, there we go, it's the carbon footprint mural. The 60 seconds will start now. Brainstorm ways to reduce your carbon footprint. Wow. I love the way people respond to a deadline challenge. What's incredible here is how many ideas have been created. You can see that by pooling our ideas rather than creating them individually in silos, we've had more ideas, some of which might make a significant difference. And if we had time, we could work our way through them and create a detailed action plan. We spoke with Matthew Syed at the start. He looked at an experiment conducted by a psychologist at Duke University, which explored the accuracy of financial forecasters at some of the most prodigious institutions in the world. The most accurate forecaster was around 5% more accurate than the average of the 28,000 forecasters in the research. Nothing surprising there, but when he looked at the average of the top 10 forecasters, he found that they were, on average, 15% more accurate than the average of all the others. In other words, combining the predictive power of a group gave a threefold increase in accuracy. The increase can be attributed to listening to perspectives and ideas that are different from our own. In the same way, on the whiteboard here, we have a diverse group of people, many of whom don't know each other, all suggesting ideas from their own perspectives. If we listen in a psychologically safe culture, where we aren't judging against preconceived ideas, we gain new insights, new perspectives. They add data and they refine our own thinking. We must listen with humility. Look for the new information and the value in everything. When you disagree, before you respond, ask yourself, why do I disagree? Can you define whether it's an opinion or an evidence-based disagreement? Don't be confrontational, but ask the other person to help you understand their perspective. you'll have earned the right to present your perspective, and both of you will grow. So how do we listen? Well, listening is about using the 3 U's. Make sure that you are uninterrupted. Make sure that you are undistracted. Screens don't help, so do what you can. And make sure that you are unjudging. Uninterrupted, undistracted, and unjudging are 3 superb rules to focus on whenever you are listening to a new idea, much like the ones we have on our mural right now. And thank you for the effort that's gone into that mural. Don't interrupt, don't rush them, and let them finish. Let a moment of silence hang when they finish to make sure that they are finished. Don't allow yourself to be distracted. Give that person your full attention, your full presence. Put your phone and emails away, close all the apps. We do this a lot in online meetings. We have other things open. Close them down if you're in a creative meeting. Focus on the faces on the screen. Look at the camera. Make sure that person feels as if you are listening. Don't express judgment or disagreement while the person's speaking. Wait till the end and ask funnel questions to clarify. Start with really open questions that allow any opinion, and move towards more closed and fact-checking questions as you get down towards the heart of the conversation. Start wide, end in a more closed fashion. So, the catalysts for innovation are very simply unlearning, psychological safety, and listening. Those 3 ingredients are key in this subject area. Unlearning allows us to pick apart our preconceptions. Psychological safety allows us to express ourselves in a safe way, feeling that we will not be judged or put down because we've taken the risk, that leap of faith in expressing something creative. And listening to other people's ideas is a gift that you can give. It builds psychological safety, and it can draw out the most extraordinary ideas. One of my favorite answers to an idea which I think may not be right is, well, that's a great idea. We're going to put a pin in that, and we're going to use that at some point. I actually have a file open of ideas that weren't right for the moment, but someone said, no, keep that. We're going to use that again later. So as our time draws to a close, I'd like to suggest, don't let this slip away. Make a note in your calendar to spend 10 minutes on Friday reflecting on how you encourage innovation in those around you. What you've heard today are a set of ideas, but can they make a difference to you? Only if you try them, only if you put them into action. Spend part of that 10 minutes thinking of 1 or 2 concrete things that you can do, and then why not put some of the learning into action? Talk to someone else, get their ideas, use their perspective to spark some creativity. If you need a reminder, you can look at the follow-up digital content in the learning part. If you don't have a CN license, email us and we'll set you up with a trial account. And if you have any questions, put them in the chat now. We're about to finish our session, but I can have a look at those questions and possibly continue answering them. I'd also like to direct you to a survey. If you join through the browser, you'll see a tab taking you to a quick survey. It's super quick. Please take a moment to share your thoughts on our masterclass today. And as our time draws to a close, I'd like to thank Country Navigator for inviting me to speak today. It's been a real pleasure to meet you. Once again, my name's Andrew Wright, and this is a subject very close to my heart. And I hope that you felt that authenticity in the way I've discussed it with you. And thank you to you for taking the time out of your day to spend an hour with you. Thank you for sharing your ideas. Thank you for your contributions to the mural. And as we finally draw to a close, I wish you a safe and happy continuation of your day. And I look forward to the next time we meet. Thank you very much and take care. Bye-bye.